Good evening, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of Spark 2025. We're thrilled to have you all here for another exciting evening of learning, creativity, and innovation. Tonight, we are yet again joined by two amazing guests from Square, Mr. Tanishka Veeramunde, co-founder and director, and Ms. Chamatka Jayasekara, operations executive. And before we begin, I'd like to remind you all to rename yourselves as team name and then your name so we can recognize you and mark your presence. So, without further delay, I'm handing the session over to our wonderful speakers from Square, Mr. Kanishka and Ms. Chama.
Thanks, Shalisha. Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good evening. So today, we are ready to kickstart the second session of Spark. Just give me a second to just share the screen and then we can start the session. I hope everyone can see the screen. There you go. Oh, right. So we are at session 2, which is stage 2 of the SquareHub sessions. That is ideation. So we've finished our foundation stage on campus, and now we're here today for the second stage. So before you go into the second stage, a few things to remind yourselves. Firstly, the Spark's mission statement, and of course, the fact that we are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So you have to keep in mind that any idea that you generate, it has to be aligned with the Spark's mission statement, which is to contribute in solving the in the climate change problem. And then, of course, the UN's and whatever solution you propose has to be aligned with one or more of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I spoke about building the team in the previous session. So there we discussed how do you set your team values and missions. So of course, whatever idea that you think about today has to align with all 4 of this. Okay, so our first activity today is going to be a workshop on ideation. Right? So specifically here, we're not talking about just another idea. We're talking about how do we think of a business idea. Okay, so the idea that you come up during this challenge has to be marketable and be given to the public as a product or a service. So that you have to keep in mind. It has to be a business idea, not just another idea. Okay, so step 1 is you have to first identify the problem. And this is what we tried to do last week. So your in the last session, right? So your last session's homework was to think of at least 5 problem statements or problem areas that you would like to solve. So out of those, today you're going to pick a problem that you can think of a business idea for. Right? So when you're looking at the problem statements that you have picked up, see if those are talking about an unmet need or a want. Okay, so you have to think about how big this problem is as well. How many people are suffering because of this problem, or how many people feel the need for a solution? That's a good way of picking out one out of all the different problem statements that you thought about. Yeah. So and then today, in today's session, we are going to think of how do we then take that problem statement and think of a product or a service to meet that need or want? Okay, so it's just as simple as that. A business idea basically addresses an unmet need or a want. Okay, so there are a couple of things we can do to validate the problem. Okay, so when we say validation, we are going to talk about two different validations at two different stages. We validate the problem first, and then once you come up with the idea, this is your next session, we are going to validate the idea. But before you even get into an idea, you have to first validate the problem. Just because you think there's a problem doesn't mean there is a big enough problem to solve with a business idea. You have to actually talk about you'd actually talk to the people who are facing this problem and see whether it's actually a big enough problem or not. If it doesn't really affect the majority, even though you can think of an idea to solve it, it won't be um, a business idea, or it won't be a worthy enough business idea. Okay. Okay, so let's look at how do you validate this problem. And this is something I recommend that every one of you do at this stage, because if you keep this for the last moment, you might have to change a lot of your plans and you might not have time, right? And last year, something we saw clearly was the winning teams, the top three winning teams, all of them went ahead and validated their problem as well as their idea. Okay, so you have to do validation at both these stages. Okay, so a couple of ways that you can validate the problem is a usability test, A/B testing. So basically, these are all, you go to the people who you think your problem is, or the people you think is facing this particular problem, and ask about what they're using right now, or what are the problems with the current method doing things, right? So you directly go and speak to these people. And then, so A/B testing specifically is comparing a couple of different ways that they're currently using. So, for example, let's say you want to see, you want to make a more efficient electric car. In that case, you go to a person who's using a Leaf, and you go to a person who's using a BYD, and then you ask, what do you think is good about that product, and what do you think should improve? Likewise, basically, you go to go to different people who uses different types of or different versions of the currently existing solution, and ask pros and cons of it. And then you can also do surveys. If the problem you're facing is, let's say, faced by the students of your campus, then you can make a survey and distribute it among the students and ask them to fill it. That's pretty much the easiest thing you can do. And then you can collect data, maybe via just interviews. There's lots of, or actually, in this sense, the data means you can find data over the internet about this particular problem, because in some cases some problems are researched, so you don't have to do a lot of groundwork. The research is published, so you can use that data. You can keep diaries, or some if it's an industry, they might be keeping diaries of their procedures, so you can go check those. And if it's a specific industry that you're looking at, then you can go on a field visit and look at how things are done now and talk to the employees there. Of course, you can do interviews, right? So there's so many different ways that you can go and look at how people are facing this problem, and also at the same time look at what is the current remedy for it, and what are the loopholes in them, right? So you have to have a very thorough idea about your problem before you go ahead and solve it. And bringing in these, let's say, maybe like survey results, or bringing in like a few seconds clips of them giving you the interview about the problem, these really make you stand out as a group when you present in the final stage. Okay, so having a thorough idea about the problem and actually understanding whether the problem is good enough to solve is step one. Okay, so this is how you choose one problem statement out of the many that you have looked at. Once you have that problem statement down is when you go into ideation. Okay, so there are two keywords here, an issue and a problem. It might sound the same, but there is a difference. If you take a problem, these can be small components of a big issue. Okay, so you can always take a big issue and break it down into smaller problems. Let's take the famous example of Pick Me, right? The issue they tried to solve was generally transport inefficiency. That's the issue. But to do that in a holistic way, they have really broken down that issue into small problems. Not knowing where you will get a taxi, like before Pick Me and Uber, we used to just go onto the road and pretty much walk until you find a tuk or wait until a tuk passes you, right? So you don't know where you can get a taxi from, nor do you know when you can get a taxi from. So that's a sub problem of the whole issue of transport. And then until you're done with your trip, you don't know how much you'd have to pay for this person, right? Even when it's metered, you wouldn't know, especially when it's metered, you wouldn't know until you're done with the trip how much they'll ask you. And another problem is safety. These are random people on the road. You're just going to get on their vehicle and go. So there's a big safety concern. And of course, back in the day, the only thing we could do is if you're going to get a vehicle from the road, it's always a tuk. You can't just put your hand into random cars and say, hey, are you a taxi? We wouldn't know, right? So all of these are some problems within the big issue of transport. So what Pick Me did was they broke down their big issue and addressed each problem and brought in different features on the app that solved each problem. So this is the kind of approach that you also have to do when you are coming up with your idea. Don't just dive in and try to solve everything. You have to have a clear understanding of where you're going to start, right? You have to be realistic when you're proposing the business plan. You can't say you're doing everything all at once. You say, okay, these are the features we're going to start with because, and back it by research and say, because these are the big problems within the issue. And then in the future, we can add these features and these features. So you have to have a plan on how you're solving the problem how we're solving the problems as well, right? So to do that, you need to know your big issue you're solving, and you also need to know what are the problems under that issue. Okay, so this is the kind of thinking that you have to have when you're trying to find an idea. Okay, now let's look at what or different approaches of finding has an existing solution most of the time. Okay, the problems are usually currently, like majority of the problems that you guys would think about would be problems that has some kind of a solution, but not that solution is not completely addressing the problem. It's not sufficient enough, or the current way of doing things is not helping, or it has loopholes. In that case, there are a lot of different, so these are the different ways you can use to change what's currently available into something new. Okay, so you start with substitution. You can substitute a product or a feature of that product with something else to make it more efficient. Okay, so basically how they made the wheelchair, right? it was previously just a chair. They substituted the the legs of the chair with wheels and made it a wheelchair that is used for something completely different, right? And then you have combination. So you can combine one product with a different product and to make a new product that probably services some completely different problem. For example, you guys have those pocket, you've seen the pocket knives, right? They have a knife, they have a bottle opener, they have nail cutters, scissors, and everything all in one tool. So they've combined so many different things together to give that one tool, right? And then you have adapt. So adapting is when you can change a product to adapt to a different context. For example, so usually, like in countries like Sri Lanka, we just use shoes. But if, say, it's a snowy country and then you want to walk on the lake, you replace the sole of the shoe with a blade and adapt it to a different context. So now it's a snowshoe, but also to skate, right? So adapting is the same product, you substitute something, you change something in it, and put it into use in a different context. Okay, and then you have modify. So modify is, as it sounds, you just change some of the features to give more value with it. So you probably remember at first, Pick Me was just an app to find rides. They kept modifying it, and today there's so many different things you can do with it. You can shop, you can do the courier services, you can book lorries out of Pick Me. So there's so many things you can do out of Pick Me now, right? So they've kept modifying it and adding value to it and evolve that product. Another very eliminate is a element that you always forget. Sometimes solutions don't work because it's overly complicated. In that case, you might want to eliminate some of the features and make it simpler to use, right? So that's something you can look at. And then there's reverse. So actually eliminate, reverse, and put to another use are very rarely used. Okay, so reverse is you restructure a product to make it more efficient. So whatever the product you have is not working, so you break it to pieces and try to put it back in different ways to see if that would work more efficiently. And then, of course, you have put to another use. That is when you use the same product differently for a different thing. Okay, so all of these elements you can use to create a new product or a service. Of course, you can use more than one thing to do so. Okay, so these are just, I'm just presenting this to you to help you think. Okay, it's not that you have to definitely use one of these consciously, but when you know all these methods and when you are actually thinking of ideas, it'll be easy for you to think of different ways of coming up with new ideas. Okay. Okay. Now, once you use all of these tactics, methods to break down the problem and find the idea, and once you think you have an idea, what do you do next? Okay. So, word of advice, don't just think of one way of doing things. Always think of multiple ideas, even if it's the same problem, right? And then once you get that idea, you need to now check it from this checklist to see if it actually is a new idea or not. There's billions of people in this planet, so people can have the same idea, and unfortunately you can be the second or third person to have the same idea and the first person has already implemented it. So you have to search and see if that idea has been done before or not. Okay, at least it should be new to Sri Lanka or the region, and there has to be something different or new about the idea for it to be competitive in this competition. that it's a new idea in the current market. In this case, also a competition, you have to make sure your idea is fresh. It's not just, new to Sri Lanka. It's new and fresh. Okay. So this doesn't exactly apply for a business, but at least so they thrive. But since it's a competition also, you make sure your idea is new. Yeah. Ever seen it or heard about it before? There's nothing like that in the market. No product or service like that. It could be brand proving a currently existing product. Okay. It's not brand new, but it has improvements that you have not seen before. Or it could be something that exists in the market, but the demand is not being met. This is from more of a business perspective. If you're thinking of whether to do this idea or not as a business, then this could be a qualifying factor. But what I'm saying is this is not enough for the Spark challenge, right? For it to be competitive, it should be any other thing but 3. Okay, but if you're just going to see if it's good as a business, then you can see if the current idea you have is actually existing in the market. That's okay, but the demand is not being met completely. Number 4 is it can be a new mode of delivery. Okay, so for example, what PickMe did, right? There were people who ran taxis, but PickMe gave a whole new mode of delivery to that business. There's an app now, you can get the taxi whenever, wherever, right? So made it, they introduced a whole new mode of delivery, right? So that could also be a viable option for the challenge. And then finally, could be different products. So already existing different products pulled together in one product. So a combination of different things that also qualifies as a new idea. So once you find your idea, actually don't finalize on one idea yet. Once you find a couple of ideas, run it by this checklist and see if it qualifies as a new and competitive idea also for the challenge. Okay, so just another method. So I'm not going to ask you to do this right now because it's going to be very time consuming, and also all your team members have to be there for the activity to work. So just take note. We call this the crazy 8s, right? So you take an A4 paper, you fold it into 8. Okay, so like you fold it 4 times and then you're good, right? And then each member has to write an idea on one of those parts. Okay, so you send. So basically, what you do is, so all, let's say you have 4 people in the group. You have 4 people in the group. You sit down in a circle, take a piece of A4 paper, you like fold it up, and then you send it around until you guys run out of ideas. And then once you're done, once you have a big list of ideas, you guys vote for the best idea. Honestly, you don't have to have an A4 paper. You don't have to have 8 foldings. The takeaway from this activity is that you guys, first of all, individually have to ideate. Ideation is not completely a group activity. Okay, you guys have to think alone first. Do your research together, discuss together, all that is fine, but you have to think about ideas on your own and then bring it to the table and discuss on it. So that's the key takeaway. Everyone in your group has to come up with something, because even though that idea is not totally picked, that idea could add value to the idea you're picking. So everyone alone think of something. So think of an idea for the problem, and then come as a group and present it, vote on it, and see if you can combine a couple of ideas to actually get a brilliant idea at the end. Okay, so there is in this ideation phase, there is some individual work as well as some group work. You remember that. So that's all about ideation, right? If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them on the chat, because now we're going into the next session, or the next segment of today's session. Okay, I'll give it a minute. Okay. Ideally, like the problem. So the question is whether the problem has to connect to climate change or any sustainable development goal is fine. Ideally, it has to connect to climate change in some way. It doesn't have to be a direct connection. It could be now you're using a more energy efficient way, so therefore less electricity is used, and therefore it's positively contributing to climate change, like that, right? It doesn't have to be a very direct connection. It's great if you can connect to climate change, especially for the Spark Challenge. The judges look at that. It doesn't mean that everyone on the top 10 was very directly connected to climate change last year also, but the winning team was very directly connected to climate change. So it does help in the challenge, at least, right? Even an indirect connection, if you can explain it, it's okay. Any other questions? Okay, looks like there aren't any, so we can move on. Okay, so this is just an introduction to the most important tool we will be using throughout the series of um, um, stages that we are going to have, the series of workshops from SquareHub. We will be using this tool called the base board or the base canvas model. Okay, so BASE here stands for business approach and structural elements. By the end of the sessions for the base canvas model, so basically up until the session before the last session is going to be on pitching. Up until the session before that, we would be covering elements of the base model. And through the base model, we are going from all the way from ideation into how do you validate that idea, into how do you establish a business, and how do you operate that business. So through this base model, we give you all the basics of what and how do you do a business. Okay. So as you can see, there are 4 key parts or key sections on the base canvas model. We start with envisioning. Envisioning is the idea phase. This is where we don't have an idea yet, but you're going to get to an idea, right? In the envisioning phase is when you come up with an idea. That's where we are right now. So in this session, we taught you how to come up with that idea, right? So that's where we are right now. And here you have to have a good understanding on who you are as an entrepreneur and what your idea is. You have to have a very thorough understanding on those two. It's not just the idea, it's also important to understand who you are and where you stand as an entrepreneur. In this case, because you are competing in teams, it's also important to know how you work together as a team. And then once you have a solid foundation of the team, yourself, and your idea, we are going into assessing. This is what we are going to talk about in our next session. So assessing is actually looking at whether the idea that you thought of is viable or not. So first think about what are you, so in assessing, we are going to discuss what you're offering to your customers, whether that is viable or whether that is enough to solve the problem. And then you're looking at your current market. Who are your competitors? What is the market like? How big is the market? How much can you grow this business? So in this assessing phase, what we're doing is we're looking at whether or not your idea is a good business idea and whether it's worth it to go ahead with the business. Okay, so that's what we're actually doing in this assessing phase. And then we're going to do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what it stands for. So we'll get into the details in the next session. We're going to do an analysis of all four of those things for your idea. And then we're going to look at what are the resources needed to execute your idea. Even though it's an amazing idea, it has a lot of strengths and lots of opportunity, and the market is great. Even if everything was there, if you don't have the resources to execute your idea, there's no point. So we are also looking at whether it's viable in terms of resources to execute your idea. So once you look at all four of these things, only we're going to actually think of establishing a business. That's where we go to evolve. Now it's time to evolve your idea into a business. First thing, now you have this, now you have a solid uh, idea in mind. The next thing you need to do is you think of the company goals. What are your company's goals in this business? And then you're going to look at the value proposition. What value are you going to give your customers? And then marketing and sales. How do you plan your marketing and sales? Essential components of a business. And how do you operate your day-to-day business? How do you take the business to market? That's the go-to-market strategy. And then how do you plan your finances? Right? So all of these things in the evolving section, they are key components to just base level operate a business. Or these are things you have to think about before you even start the business, and then you're ready to start the business. Once you've planned all those, we are going to actually operating that business. Now here's where you think of all the key activities, like what do you need to do in the business to make it sustainable and keep it running? Who are the key players in the business? Your suppliers, your employees, your customers, everyone that is related to your business, key players. And then you're looking at, so how do you get your business to the customers? So to do that, you need to know the customer first. So you do see who and how your customers are segmented. Then how do you get to your customers? That's what your channels are. How do you communicate to your customers? How do you bring your product or service to your customers? That we discuss on the channels. And then customer relationships. How do you build and keep good customer relationships? And finally, how do you grow this business? How do you constantly assess your business and grow from there? Okay, so this base model gives you a holistic understanding of ideation all the way to establishing a business or planning for a business and uh, establishing a business and going forward with it, right? So this is going to be our base literally when we're doing our future workshops. Today, like I said, we are in the first section, which is envisioning. That's where we are right now. So the only activity we have planned for today is in this QR code, right? Understanding who you are as an entrepreneur, and in this Spark Challenge, what do you also expect from this Spark Challenge? Who you are in the Spark Challenge and who you are as an entrepreneur. Okay, so I would like everyone, I'll give you maybe 5 minutes. Maximum will take 5 minutes. I'm also going to monitor the responses coming in. Please scan this QR code and start filling this right now. Okay. And if some of your team members are missing, please take a screenshot of this slide you're seeing and share it with them. Filling this quick survey is mandatory as part of the Spark Challenge because it's a requirement by the organizer and the donor. So please make sure you fill this in, and we will be monitoring. Like you'll have to also put your group names there. So we'll be monitoring if all of the members of the group have signed up or not. This is a mandatory requirement for you to go for the next stage, which is the idea submission, the next um, competition stage. Okay, so first thing we are going to do is we are going to look at you as an entrepreneur, and then your idea will be assessed at the idea submission, which the team will tell you all the deadlines for. Right now, I'll start the timer for maybe 5 minutes, and then you guys can take the 5 minutes to fill this in. I'm only seeing about 30 responses out of 254 people in the room. So I'll give it a few more minutes to complete.
It means something is wrong in the system. When I try to submit, it shows the document cannot be viewed or something.
Let me check. Is that problem there for all of you or just,
I'll try to refill.
yeah, I'm so sorry. You have to log in with like a Google account, otherwise you won't be able to.
Might be that.
Yeah. Because you should be getting your responses. You get an email of the responses to your own email as well. Because later we'll be using, like at the end of the sessions, we'll be revisiting this self-assessment. So that's the purpose. I'm gonna at least wait until the responses hit 100. So guys, hurry up. Sorry, last year there was a team number given to all the teams, but if you don't have a team number, just put the team name, that's enough. Just saw the question on the chat. All right. I think if you guys are still filling, that's okay. Just make sure all your group members also fill in the form. Um, yeah. So that's it for today's session. We just looked at ideation and we finished the first part of the base model, which is envisioning. And so homework for next session is you guys have to have a confirmed idea in mind. Don't wait until the last moment of, I mean, you can't, right? Because you have a deadline coming up to submit your ideas, and then and a couple of and I think some groups will be eliminated and some groups will be selected to go forward, right? So make sure you think about the idea now so you have plenty of time to validate that idea, because that's a very essential part of the process, right? So when you come for the next session, you guys have to have a solid idea in mind. Maybe you can have a backup idea as well, because we are going into idea validation. And if your first idea didn't work, you might want to have a plan B. But either way, you have to have a couple of good ideas in mind when you come for the next session. Otherwise, there's no point. Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Please make sure you, again, once again, a reminder, only 100 responses were there when I started the session again. So make sure you guys fill in this form and ask any group member that are not here to also fill in the form. Thank you guys for joining, and I will see you again in the next session.